Okay, so welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking at classroom management.
Sounds good.
We've got some fascinating material to work with, actually.
Yeah.
We're going to be diving into Hacking Classroom Management, a book by Mike Roberts,
Okay.
and we thought this would be really interesting to take a look at
Yeah.
because even if you're not a teacher, the
Yeah.
insights into managing a classroom and kind of fostering engagement and that kind of stuff
Sure.
can apply to a lot of other
Oh, absolutely.
situations as
Yeah.
well.
Groups, teams, anything, really,
Yeah.
when you think about it.
So the author, Mike Roberts, is actually a middle school English teacher.
Right.
So he's writing from experience, not just theory.
Exactly. That's what makes this one so interesting. He's not just some academic,
Right.
writing from, an ivory tower or something.
Yeah.
This is a guy who's been in the trenches
Exactly.
and dealt with this stuff firsthand.
Yeah. And I think what he's trying to do with this book is present kind of almost like hacks, for classroom management. So,
Well, I think the title gives that away.
yeah,
Yeah.
it does. It does. You're right. But I think it is more about kind of shifting your thinking in a way and the way you approach things, which can be a little bit counterintuitive sometimes. But so let's just jump right in.
Okay.
The first key insight that we kind of pulled from this book is that idea of shifting
Sure.
from control to empowerment.
Mhm.
And I thought that was a really interesting way to put it because a lot of teachers, starting off,
Sure.
especially new teachers, they want to control everything, right?
Yeah.
They have this long list of
Yeah.
rules.
No gum, no eating,
Mhm.
no drinking,
Mm-hmm.
bathroom only with permission, no talking without raising your hand,
Yes.
no cheating, no cell phones,
Yes.
no inappropriate language,
Exactly. And it's just,
dress code, all that.
Yeah.
Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this.
don't do that. And the way Roberts puts it is if you start off with a really big emphasis on everything that kids can't do, it's like you're setting them up for failure almost. You're creating this kind of
Like
negative.
you're just inviting them to, rebel.
Yes, exactly.
Because at that age, I mean, come on,
Yeah.
you want to push back against that.
Yeah.
So I like the fact that he frames it as empowerment
Yeah.
rather than control, because
Yeah.
it's more about guiding them
Exactly.
and giving them the tools they need to
Right.
to make good choices.
Yeah. So what he calls this is classroom management 2.0,
Okay.
and he says that the basic philosophy behind it is to treat students more like people. So it's less, kind of authoritarian, top-down approach,
Right.
and more about giving them a voice.
Giving them a say in how the classroom runs, basically.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I think what's interesting too is that this can apply to, as I was saying earlier, right?
To other situations. Like, think about if you're managing a team or a project or even your family.
Mm-hmm.
If you give people more autonomy, more of a voice,
Yeah.
they're more likely to take ownership, to be engaged.
Yeah, I agree. It's human nature to want to have some control over your environment,
Right.
And when you're given that, you're more likely to buy in, to care about what's going on.
And I think the key is
Yeah.
that Roberts provides some very specific examples of how to do this. It's one thing to say, like,
The right
empower
setup.
students, but it's another to actually do it. Right.
Give them the tools, the concrete ways to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, for example, something as simple as needing to use the restroom,
Okay.
right? Instead of making kids, raise their hand and ask permission,
Right.
which can be
Mm-hmm.
embarrassing, disruptive.
Yeah.
He suggests things like just having a nonverbal signal, like point to the door or,
Or, have a sign-out sheet or something.
yeah, that's smart. It gives them a sense of, self-management,
Yeah.
and it doesn't disrupt the flow of the class.
Exactly. And I think, he also talks about things like
Right.
moving away from cold calling.
Yeah.
You know that thing where
Yeah, where you just, pick a random student
Yeah.
and put them on the spot.
Exactly. He says that can actually be really damaging,
Yeah.
not just to the student's confidence, but also
Yeah.
to the relationship between the student and the teacher.
Yeah, I mean, it creates that sense of fear, right?
Yeah.
And no one wants to learn when they're afraid.
Yeah, exactly. And, it can just create this dynamic where students are afraid to take risks or participate.
Or they might just tune out completely
Right.
because they're so worried about being called on
Yeah.
that they're not really paying attention to the lesson anymore.
Right. And there was a great example from another teacher in the book, Tyler Tanner,
Okay.
who who cut his rules down from he had 11 rules, which he jokingly called the 11 Commandments, down to just 2.
2? Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Be cool to each other and always give your best effort.
That's right.
And then
like a more concise Bill of Rights.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then he empowered his students to decide, what being cool actually meant.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it was a collaborative process.
Oh, that's really smart.
And the kids really responded to it, He found that just saying hey, are you being cool was usually enough to get them back on track.
Oh, that's pretty amazing.
And, he also did away with assigned seating. Just said, sit wherever you want as long as you're being respectful and you're productive. And he said that cold calling became almost unnecessary because the kids they're engaged. Yeah. So Roberts then goes on to outline kind of a blueprint for implementing this approach. And I thought it was really helpful because it's very concrete.
Okay. So what are the key elements of this blueprint?
So first of all, he says you have to actually commit to empowering students.
Okay. So it's got to be more than just a surface level thing.
Exactly. And then the next thing is to frame your expectations positively.
Okay. So instead of a list of don'ts, it's more about the do's.
Right. So instead of saying no gum, it's we keep our classroom clean and free of distractions.
Yeah, I see.
So it's more about
it's about creating a positive environment rather than just, a list of restrictions.
Yeah. And then he emphasizes the importance of involving the students in the process.
Well, so like getting their input on the rules and the procedures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And then finally, he says, avoid punishing the entire class for the actions of a few.
Right. That's huge.
Which is so common.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's staying in for recess because someone was talking.
Exactly.
Yeah, that never made sense to me.
And he makes the point that when you do that, you actually kind of undermine the community you're trying to build, because the kids who are behaving well, they're like, wait a minute, why am I being punished?
Exactly. And it breeds resentment, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, moving on to the second big idea, which I think is so important, high expectations.
Okay, high expectations. How does he define that in the context of a classroom?
So he says that, as teachers, we sometimes make assumptions about what students are capable of based on, their past performance or their IEPs or even their family history.
Right.
And we kind of limit them without even realizing it. Yeah, we put them in a box.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
And his hack for this is really simple, but it's not always easy to do.
Okay. What is it?
Just expect the best.
Just expect the best from everyone.
From everyone.
Okay.
Every single student.
And how do you do that practically?
Well, he gives some really specific tips.
Okay.
Like starting every class with a smile. Telling students every day that you believe in them, that you expect their best.
And not just saying it, but showing it. Right?
Yeah.
Like through your actions, through your your teaching style, that kind of thing.
And he even talks about dressing professionally, like setting the tone.
Oh, interesting.
And directly asking students to make you proud.
Yeah.
Through their behavior, through their effort.
Yeah, that's a powerful one. It's like you're giving them a responsibility to live up to, but in a positive way.
Exactly. And then, of course, the blueprint for implementing this. So he says,
Okay, so high expectations blueprint, what's that look like?
First of all, you got to articulate those expectations clearly on day one.
Okay, set the bar from the beginning.
Right.
Got it.
And then hold all students to those high standards. But recognizing that high standards might be different for different students.
Right. Individualized, challenges, but still, pushing them to be their best.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have to model those high expectations yourself.
Right. Lead by example.
Right.
Okay.
And then build trust, so that students know you're not just, setting them up to fail, that you actually believe in them.
Right.
And then provide regular reminders and examples.
Okay, so keep reinforcing it throughout the year.
Exactly. Now, of course, he addresses the pushback. Yeah.
What do teachers say when they hear this idea?
Well, one of the things that comes up is that teachers will say, well, students already know what's expected of them.
Right. It's common sense.
And Robert's response to that is, no, you have to actually teach it, just like any other concept.
Yeah, you got to break it down, you got to model it.
Exactly. And then the other thing that comes up is cheating.
Oh.
Teachers will say, well, if I don't have all these rules, then kids are just going to cheat. And Robert's response to that is actually really interesting.
What's he say?
He says, rather than creating all these rules based on the assumption that kids are going to cheat, focus on the majority of kids who won't cheat.
Okay.
And build trust with them. And he has this this 3-step process for take-home assignments that's all about building that trust.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the process?
So first, you explicitly state your trust in them.
Okay.
I trust you to do this work honestly. Then you require a verbal commitment from them.
Okay, so they have to say, I will not cheat.
Yeah, something like that. And then finally, when they turn in the assignment, you have them make a promise.
Okay, like a final affirmation that they did the work, honestly.
Exactly. Right. And he says that he's actually seen a decrease in cheating using this method.
That's pretty amazing. So it's almost like by trusting them, you're making them more likely to be trustworthy.
Right.
Yeah, I could see that.
And then he also talks about, teachers who say, well, I can't afford to dress professionally.
Right.
And he says it doesn't have to be expensive.
Yeah.
Just making an effort.
Right.
To dress in a way that shows you take your job seriously.
Yeah. It's about projecting that image of professionalism and respect for the students.
Exactly. And there's a really great quote from a student in the book, Rory Beals. He says, the best classes I've ever had were ones where the teacher obviously expected a lot from us. And the worst classes were ones where it was obvious that they didn't.
Wow. That's pretty powerful coming from a student.
Yeah. And Roberts also mentions the example of Jaime Escalante from the movie Stand and Deliver.
Oh, yeah, the calculus teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He really believed that students would rise to the level of expectation.
Ganas.
Yeah.
He talked about ganas.
Yeah.
That inner desire, that fire.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's inspiring.
So moving on to our third key insight.
Okay.
Which is all about connecting with students.
Okay.
Beyond the classroom.
Interesting.
So Roberts points out that it's easy to get so caught up in the day-to-day of teaching that you forget that these are, whole people.
Yeah, they have lives outside of school.
Exactly.
They have interests, passions.
And he argues that it's really valuable to connect with students in their extracurricular activities.
Okay, so go to their games, their plays, their concerts, that kind of...
Exactly. And he says it doesn't have to be a big thing.
Right.
Just show up.
Just show up.
Even for a little bit.
Yeah.
And he suggests inviting colleagues because it can help build relationships with them as well.
Oh, that's a good point.
And he says, sit with the students.
Right.
Don't just stand off to the side.
Yeah.
Really be present.
Yeah. Show them that you're genuinely interested.
Exactly. And then the next day in class, take a moment to talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Acknowledge it.
Say, hey, I saw you at the game last night. Great job.
Right. Show them that you were paying attention.
Exactly. And make it a regular thing, not just like a one-time thing.
Okay, so build it into your routine.
And of course, he addresses the pushback.
Right. So what do teachers say when he suggests this?
Well, some teachers say, well, I'm not interested in basketball, or I don't like musicals.
Yeah, that's not my thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Robert's response to that is, it doesn't matter if you're interested.
Right.
What matters is that you're showing the student that you care.
Yeah, it's about them, not you.
Exactly. And then the other pushback he gets is, well, I'm their teacher, not their friend.
Right.
And his response to that is, yes, but this isn't about being their friend.
Right.
This is about being a caring adult in their life.
Yeah, that's a good distinction.
And he tells this great story about how he chaperoned something like 57 middle school dances.
57. Wow.
Yeah.
That's dedication.
He said it wasn't always fun, but it was worth it.
Yeah, he was there for his students.
And then he brings in the perspective of a football coach, Coach Kennedy, who says that when you see kids in their extracurricular activities, it can actually raise your expectations for them in the classroom.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because you see what they're capable of.
Right. You see their potential in a different light.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And he also mentions Coach Gaines from Friday Night Lights, who was all about building relationships and giving your best effort.
Yeah. Be the best version of yourself on and off the field.
Exactly. So, wrapping it all up.
Okay.
3 key insights from Hacking Classroom Management.
Right.
Moving from control to empowerment.
Empowering those students.
The power of high expectations.
High expectations for everyone.
And connecting with students beyond the classroom.
Going to those games and concerts.
Exactly. And I think the big takeaway is that these aren't just, tips and tricks. They're all about building relationships, creating a positive environment.
And ultimately, that's what makes for a successful classroom, right? Where everyone feels supported and they can thrive.
Yeah. So, as we finish up here, think about this. Whether you're an educator or just someone who works with people, what's one small step that you can take to empower the people around you, to show them that you have high expectations for them, and to connect with them on a personal level?
Yeah, that's a great question to think about.
And if you want to learn more, definitely check out Mike Roberts' book,
Hacking Classroom Management.
Hacking Classroom Management.
Lots of great stuff in there.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
See you next time.